Welcome back to the HRE Forum audio series. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 11, which we talk about freedom in a political and a cultural context. So again, this is the second chapter within Unit 4, the final unit in this course. Um, and again, just as a quick overview, it's reviewing freedom within a much more concrete context around your own lives, society in general. Okay, this chapter is going to look at it again from a general political and social overview. So, when we look at what we consider a modern liberal democratic society, um, that's the society we live in now replaced a society that was structured around a sacred and a cosmic order. So, little history, when you look at the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, if you will, that's when you see a shift to what we consider this modern liberal democratic society. And it's a movement away from that uh, society where some kind of cosmic or religious order, aka in some cases the Judeo-Christian faith, had kind of a central role in organizing society um, in the context of what we consider, political and social freedom. Uh, so we now, like I said, we live in this society where it's in a sense modern, and that modern system has created um, potential pitfalls or issues with our freedom, or it's created handcuffs to our freedom in certain ways. Um, the bulk of this chapter, just as kind of a quick aside, quick introduction, is going to focus on four philosophers who have looked at how freedom works in quote unquote the modern age, and how that um, you know has led to certain expectations, whatnot, on the part of the individual and society. So the first of which is Hobbes. And Hobbes says the basis of society is a tacit contract where individuals give up some of their appetite for power in exchange for the security of using their powers without fear of extreme violence. One accepts the obligation to obey a ruler in order to safeguard one's freedom. It is a freedom based on self-interest. So, and that's just kind of a quick summary of what you're going to see in the text, but really what, we try to deconstruct that a little bit. Uh, we give up that, for Hobbes, it's you're giving up some freedom in order to protect freedoms or protect your ability to exercise freedoms. You'll give up others or hand them over to somebody or a ruling system or institution in order to safeguard other freedoms, to prevent you being the victim of some kind of extreme violence. Really, it's the idea that there's part of the pitfalls in a modern society that we have to sacrifice certain things for our safety that's going to guarantee other freedoms. The next philosopher is Locke, and Locke kind of points out that the starting point is the protection of property. Um, he is willing to join in society with others for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberties, and estates, which I call by the general name property. The formation of civil society requires that all individuals voluntarily surrender their individual rights to uphold the natural law in defense of property interests to the community. Again, um, in an attempt to just kind of simplify that, or break it down, it's your possessions. So you're now, Locke looks at society, this philosopher looks at society and says, wait a minute, um, in an effort to protect what you own, protect what you've gained in life, protect what you've amassed, you're willing to give up certain rights. You're willing to give up certain freedoms, all in the name of protecting what you have, protecting your goods, um, protecting your lives and liberties, that you're willing to, there's again, it's all coming back to the fact that people are willing to make sacrifices for certain things. We then move on to Rousseau, who, as his philosophy states, the institution of any genuine political society must be the result of a social pact or free association of intelligent human beings who deliberately choose to form the type of society to which they will owe allegiance. This is the only valid basis for a community that wishes to live in accordance with the requirements of human freedom. So for Rousseau, it's the fact that we come together within social groups. And when we come together in groups, we come together in societies and in cultures, we make social pacts, we make these associations. And it's only within that's a valid basis for us to live with human freedom. It's got to be done within a society. There's, it's done within a community. So now you're starting to see that attack on individual human freedom, or the pitfalls of freedom, in the sense that as part of a society, the individual kind of takes a back seat. It goes on to say that according to, and again, this is under Rousseau's kind of theories, according to utilitarianism, the measure of the good is not reason, but whatever maximizes pleasure for the greatest number. So as part of a group, we're looking to maximize what's going to keep the majority happy. We're not going to use reason and rationality to say, well, we should do this or should do that or should do this, because if that then conflicts with the happiness or quote unquote pleasure of the majority, it's going to be in contravention of that pact we've made with our society, our pact for freedom within our community. Okay. Our last philosopher, Rawls, kind of puts forth this idea: each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. Therefore, in a just society, the rights secured by justice are not subject to political bargaining or to the calculus of social interests. And he kind of goes on to say, with the discovery of the rights and freedoms of the individual, there developed a culture of individualism. These ideas have had a tremendous positive influence in the development of free societies and democratic principles. They've also had a negative influence, which I'll break down real quickly. But just to go back to what Rawls is talking about, in other words, we're now you as an individual are bound by this idea of justice. Your freedom is surrounded by this justice. And it's a justice that can't be politically bargained away. It's a justice that the common good or the group society cannot override as well, which, based on events that have happened in recent political history in North America and around the world, you can see where that has really kind of taken fruition and come to life. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own, if you will. Which then comes back to this idea of individualism. Individualism draws people into themselves, making their lives poor in meaning, which, again, we've spent, if you look through this course, we've always talked about the fact that we as human beings cannot evolve, grow, better ourselves, be better ethically and morally, embrace our freedom better, embrace our development without each other. Individualism runs counter to that. It makes you, it pulls you inside. It's all about you, and you on your own, you yourself. And it denies us that ability to embrace the other. With individualism, values tend to become relative. Very simple statement that starts to point out that instead of having an overarching set of values that we as a society, as a culture, as as a group try to adhere to. Now all of a sudden it's relative to the individual. Well, as me, myself, and I, as one individual, I may hold to values A, B, C, whereas you as an individual may hold to values D, E, and F. And the fact is, now it's become a relative state. Well, I hold these values, therefore they're important, but the person beside me holds to different values and they're important, and there creates that friction within society, friction within cultures. Uh, with individualism, debate tends to center on procedure rather than substance. That's kind of it's a straightforward way of trying to say, well, what they're trying to say, hopefully in a straightforward way, is the fact that when we look at debate and we talk about debate in society where people stand up and say, I believe this is wrong or I believe this is right, it's no longer the substance of the debate and whether it's actually in keeping with some kind of ethical and moral standard. It has now become the procedure about the debate, that we have the debate and it's relative to an individual's individual values. It comes full circle there. Okay. With that kind of comes the Catholic Church's response to this, and freedom is exercised in relationships between human beings. So again, that needing each other. The great fallacy of individualism is that its starting point is the person in isolation. In fact, persons exist only in relationship. In other words, we can't isolate ourselves and expect to embrace the best things that life have to offer, or experience all that life has to offer, because we're denying ourselves access to relationships or limiting those relationships. There's a hierarchy of values, and values are not relative. And in that hierarchy, most people, I'm sure there's going to be people who will argue and debate this long after I've posted this, or people are going to hear this, or students will go on to, you guys will go on to college, university, or other areas and have this debate. But when we look at that, for us, that hierarchy of values starts within, for us, when I say us, I'm talking about Catholic Christians. There's a hierarchy of values within the church, and those hierarchy of values then translate into how we deal with society and the respect of the common good, and some universal human rights. All of that's, again, comes back to the group. It can't be done as an individual in isolation. And the last one is teleological ethics places moral questions in the context of the end and purpose of human life. In other words, it's not about the means. It's always about the end. What's the end goal of this? What are the end goals of these actions? What are the end goals of your choices? And are those end goals furthering the purpose of life, furthering your vocation, furthering, that sustainability of relationships with one another as human beings? That then goes right back to what we were talking about with the hierarchy of values. It's kind of built right into teleological ethics. The text kind of goes on and points out that, while instrumental reason increases our capacities in things like medicine and technology, it also creates dependence and lessens freedom. Just simply, I call it the cell phone experiment. Try to turn your cell phone off for a couple hours a day, or turn it off at night. Don't leave it on all night, and see what kind of happens. It's interesting how that tech has allowed people to. It's funny. It's allowed people to reconnect, or and I say reconnect, but bring back relationships that may have, because of distance and location, geolocation, been tough to maintain, you now can embrace those through social media and technology. Yet we're dependent on that in the sense that if we didn't have that, would we be able to have other relationships? Or we're embracing other relationships as well too. Um, what's interesting is towards the end of the chapter, it kind of talks about you know that the bureaucracy of government, the privilege of wealth, the structures of the economy, the power of corporations are so pervasive that individual freedom and our capacity to change them are no match. In the sense that, can we affect any kind of change in the system? And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that human beings are so inured in these systems, these institutions, that changes all but impossible. And because it's all but impossible, that's had a very detrimental effect on our freedom. Um, Again, Catholic Christian hope holds out the expectation of liberation from any powers of oppression. None can withstand the freedom-giving power of God that is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit. It is from the same religious source that Charles Taylor, again another philosopher that's kind of briefly mentioned earlier in the text, um, argues for a retrieval of moral sources to set us free. In other words, we kind of need to go looking for our sources of morality, our sources of ethics, and what drives those sources of ethics and morality. Um, whether it be, in collaboration with your own family and the social development that's gone on within your family, and whatever institutions, or hopefully religious institutions you're part of, that have set a framework up for you that you can go to those sources, recognize those sources and embrace those sources to embrace freedom in the truest sense of the word, that is going to affect much more positive change for our society in the future. Again, as always, don't hesitate to ask any questions if you're not sure about what's in here or what you've read in the textbook. And until the next time, have a great day.